So I'm still fairly new at being live, so please forgive anything that you're not used to seeing. I'm going to try talking about capitalism tonight because I always have conversations about capitalism. I'll say right from the outset, it's not something I enjoy. It's not something I necessarily agree with. There are way better ways that we could do things that wouldn't put so many people in harm's way. The way that people have talked about capitalism for a long time, and much of it has to do with things like McCarthyism, are because that's what they've been told. Capitalism good, socialism bad. And that's not necessarily the case. I mean, the idea behind capitalism sounds nice. It does sound nice. It sounds like it's a way that everybody can get ahead and everybody can do well and everything is hunky-dory. But it doesn't necessarily work that way. They tell us that capitalism works because when people want something, somebody else will decide they want to make money making it, and they'll make it, and so everybody that wants it will have it, and the person that makes it will make money on it, and that's a great way to do things, which sounds, hey, I get it. It sounds like that's going to work. And the idea that money should motivate people to want to go out and do good things and make things better and be more efficient and be a more productive member of society. These sound like wonderful ideas. These sound like great ideas. And if it actually worked that way, it would be a good idea. But that's not what happens. If we look at the way that capitalism actually operates, it has nothing to do with supply and demand. It has to do with the fact that somebody has an idea, they go out, they start making something or providing a service, and they make money at it mostly because they tell people they need it. They don't wait for, enough people want this that I have to do it. They wait for, well, I have an idea and I'll just push it on people. Yeah, you need this. Absolutely, you need this. You must need this. Which is one of the reasons that they talk about advertising being the lifeblood of capitalism. It is, because that's the only way that they can tell people, you want this, you need this, whether you do or not. Either of those things. That trading money between people means that they can make money by making money, basically, and that's kind of crazy. I don't know exactly how it became that that a good that should make people money as a business is money itself. That seems kind of, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's mostly what happens now. So then, of course, you get into this idea of taxes and how terrible that is for capitalism, and how, so the problem is, if we've got a system that is run on money, there needs to be a function in society to allow an overarching societal body of some sort to function within that system, to be able to move in and out of that system, and to be able to interact with that system, and to be able to provide things that are necessary for so many people that it's probably something that should be done by society rather than any one particular person. And that means taxes. That means that some of the money that floats around in that market needs to be used by society as a whole to do things for the good of society as a whole, rather than for one person to be able to make money off of it. Now, that also means that that body hires within that market in order to put that money back into the market, which again makes a certain amount of sense, but they have to have a way to have that money in order to put that money back into the market because of the ways that it's set up, that, excuse me, the ways that different economies interact with one another. And so there's only so much supply of money that a country can make, which even that seems kind of silly to me, because if the government is the body that makes the money, they can make money. And a lot of people argue that and say, well, that only creates inflation, because then every time they print another dollar to put into the system, it makes all the other dollars worth less. Not worthless, but worth less. And I can see a certain amount of sense in that, except that, I mean, these are the people that essentially they can legislate anything. So if they decide to print more money, they print more money, and there's nothing anybody can really do about that. And if they decide that they want to start, I hate to use the word control because everyone freaks out about the word control, but if they decide that they want to start trying to keep prices at a certain level, but that again is stepping outside of capitalism, because the idea behind that in capitalism is that you only charge as much as people will pay. But it hasn't stayed that way. It started that way because there was more of a barter system, more of a barter mindset among people. If prices were too high, people would go and say, well, I'm not paying that much for that. Here's what I will pay for it. And there might have to be some negotiation among the buyer and the seller in order to figure out, just where that price lies. But the problem becomes that is not the way things work. People, they put things out on the shelves, they set prices for them, and you don't get the option of going and saying, well, that's not a fair price for that, so we need to do something about that price. And that, honestly, just as much as the government setting prices, that also steps completely outside of what capitalism is supposed to be. Because the problem is, it's not just things that people want, luxury items, TVs, stuff like that they're setting those prices on. It's also things like food. Everybody needs food. If they have set those prices for that food, and you go in and say, well, I'm not paying that much for that food, you're going to starve. So there isn't that interaction that supposedly works with the free market. There can't be, because people starve to death within that kind of a system. And that becomes a problem, in that not everybody can be successful in capitalism. Capitalism is designed for people who have the capacity to not look at how other people are doing, but only worry about how they're doing. And that they see that as making things better for everyone, because they're more successful, they have more money, so they're pumping more money into the economy, which means other people can be successful. But it doesn't necessarily work that way, because what ends up happening is now you have to work for one of those people who are successful, and you can't have success because they're the one that's successful in that field already. That's the only field that you know anything about. How are you supposed to compete with the person you're working for? Because if you go out and try to start there, because they're going to make sure you don't make enough money to be their competition. And that actually means that prices can go as high as that person wants them to. Exactly that way. Because if you have to work for somebody else, he's going to make sure that you don't become his competition or her competition. And so to say, well, if you work hard, you can get ahead. No, because that person always has control over just how successful you can become. In terms of being able to make money, in terms of being able to have money, in terms of being able to be their competition. The person you work for has the control over whether or not you're able to do that. And so it takes away all of those things that people talk about being these capitalist values. Capitalism itself actually takes those values out of the system and creates ways for people to not be able to do exactly what capitalism claims to be able to do. Obviously it's a system, it doesn't claim anything. The people who support it and the people who have written reams and reams and reams about how wonderful it is. And for wireless cell phones is the same technology that Nikola Tesla invented way back in the early 20th century, late 19th or early 20th century. He worked for Thomas Edison. When he started talking about, let's start with the very fact that the type of power we use now, AC power, alternating current, and the way that electricity used to work, which was DC power, which is direct current. DC power was invented by Thomas Edison. AC power was invented by Nikola Tesla, who worked for Edison at the time. Edison made sure that his idea was the one that was used at the time and paid money to make sure that Tesla's ideas never went anywhere. And when Tesla suggested the idea that we could make electricity wireless, Edison really didn't like that idea. And actually, by that time, he had fired Tesla. So Tesla didn't even work for him. But Edison made sure he went out and paid money to people to make sure that wireless electricity didn't become a thing. And then somebody, I couldn't tell you who, went back and looked at that technology and figured out a way that it could be used to send phone signals. And we have cell phones. But it was, until even the early 21st century, until we actually had cell phones. But imagine if we had started with that wireless electricity technology, how much faster we actually would have had cell phones. So to say that capitalism makes sure that these innovations are good and that these innovations move us forward is false, patently false, demonstrably false, in that in many ways it has kept us back from technologies that, and has held back technologies that take an extra 50 years to come to fruition because, either somebody decided that they didn't like the person who was trying to make that innovation and so made sure their ideas didn't go anywhere, or because that person couldn't get together the money to pay to have their innovation put forward. So in a lot of ways, capitalism actually keeps us back. I know that in a lot of ways people talk about how Russia, for instance, Russia was sort of socialist. Communism and socialism they interact in some ways and they don't interact in many other ways. To my way of thinking, what happened in communism, particularly in Russia, was people were forced to go to work to make things that the state, the government of Russia then sold, but the people in power in the government of Russia kept the money from that and used that as a way to ensure that nobody else got the money except for them. And so that ensured that they got all the resources. That's actually capitalism. That's not socialism at all, because if it was socialism, any of the monies that were gained for that they still would use for luxury items would have gone back to the workers. They would not have gone to the people in power. They wouldn't have stayed with the state. The money wouldn't have stayed with the state or with the people in power in the state. They would have gone to the people that were doing the work, in order to make those things that were then being sold. That's socialism. Communism works completely different. Communism actually works more like a corporation. in that within a corporation, there are workers who make things. Think Walmart. Walmart has employees that make things that then go into their stores that they then sell. But certainly that money doesn't all go back, hardly any of it goes back to the workers. Instead, it goes into the pocket of the CEO of Walmart and the board of directors of Walmart. And that is very much the way that communism, that's what communism did. That's what communism does. But that's not socialism. And so when you hear people scream about, oh, well, that's socialist, yeah, probably. All that means is that it is focused on ideals that mean that we look at society as a whole. It should really, instead of socialism, it should be called societyism, because that is what it really is focused on. It's focused on the idea that things that are good for society are the things that should be put forth by a governing body for people to create, for people to make, and then to be honestly and fairly distributed to those who need it. And if within a system like that, what you can also do is you can maintain a free market within that, so that things like luxury items like televisions or computers or cell phones, or, I mean, everyone should have a cell phone at this point, but you know, if you want a fancy cell phone, or if you want a giant big screen TV, you can still go out and do beyond in order to get those luxury items. And I'm not necessarily a proponent of maintaining a free market within any sort of socialist society. That's just not my thing. But I can see why that would make a certain amount of sense, especially as a turning point from where we are right now into a truly socialist society. Because one of the things that capitalism has really done is created a whole, almost a subspecies of human that are people living in poverty. And I don't mean that in a negative way towards people in poverty. I mean that that's sort of the way that they're viewed by a capitalist society, as a subspecies, as sort of a whole other, in many ways, not even human. It absolutely happens. And the problem is that a lot of times the people who live in poverty are just people who don't have skills that are marketable in a capitalist way. Now, if you don't have skills that are marketable in a way that is recognized by the capitalist system as something that should be paid for, you can't make money, and you end up in poverty. And it doesn't matter that if that's something like a stay-at-home mother staying home with their kids. How does that not work? And how does that not benefit society? And why is it that we look down on people? You know, you hear the phrase, the horrible, horrible phrase, welfare queens. These people that have kids and stay at home and collect welfare and live off of welfare and their child tax benefit. Well, if they are staying at home with their children, that is a benefit to the children. We know that. We absolutely know that. So if they are staying at home and creating better human beings, how does that not benefit society as a whole? How is that not good for everyone? And I mean, I don't know. It's a difficult conversation to have, because I do understand people's points about how quite often what that does is it creates kids who have grown up in that situation and see that as the only way to live. But it doesn't have to be that way. If we recognize those mothers as human beings that are taking care of other human beings, who, if they're raised properly, and if they're given the opportunities, and if they're given if they're taught properly, they can be productive members of society. But because they're those poor kids, because they go to school with less than and are bullied for it, they think they're no better than that. They think they can't do better than that. Not because they see their mother doing that and so she's a bad influence, but rather that other people assume that they're bad people because of it and treat them like bad people, and so they become bad people. And not all of them, but in many cases, but that's what happens. That's the actual cycle. As much as the narrative that people are given about it is that, well, they grew up watching that and so they were taught that being unproductive is okay. No, that's not the way of it, because that mother was being productive. She was being a productive member of society by raising those children to become good members of society, and hopefully to become good people. And because I think that's more important, to be a good person, to be an empathetic person, to be a humane person is far more important than being someone who can stomp all over their fellow human beings and make more money than the others. And so to say that a mother who's trying to raise good people is an unproductive member of society is rather a ridiculous statement to make, because they are being a productive member of society. And when we put them down, we actually end up giving the idea to our own kids that it's okay to pick on them because they're bad people already. And so that hasn't been created by their mother. It's been created by all the other parents not teaching their own kids what a good person looks like. It's created by the idea that only if you have money are you a good person. And money and good are opposite things. If you're a Christian person, and you hear it all the time, well, it's in the Bible. You know what else is in the Bible? The love of money is the root of all evil. So if you're talking about good people and evil people, those who love money are actually the bad people, aren't they? And so then it sort of follows that those who don't care about money and are more concerned with their fellow humans, those are the good people. So if a mother can raise her kids to be good people, that makes more of a productive member of society than someone who loves money and worries about money and is only concerned with money. And that's a fairly easy to follow line of thought, I think. And wow, up there in like 25 minutes. And so to say that generational poverty is because of the people that are in poverty isn't so. It's actually the people that are outside that create this bubble that kids especially who have grown up in poverty can't pop, because they're taught you're a bad person because you don't have money. And we know from all kinds of child psychology research, if you tell a kid enough times, this is who you are, this is who you are, this is who you are, that's who they're going to be. And that's all they're ever going to be. And that's who they're always going to be. So when you have taught your kids to think less of the poor kids, you're the problem. Not the poor kid, not the poor kid's parents. You're the problem. Because you have taught your kids that it's okay to be that way. And so you have maintained the oppression of that child that's growing up in poverty, rather than encouraging them to be a good person, encouraging them to be out in the world and show themselves and be proud of who they are. You're creating a situation where they're supposed to be ashamed of themselves, where they're supposed to think they're less than other people. And that's really a problem. That is really the problem. And that is, when people talk about systemic poverty and how the system creates poverty, that's it right there. This idea that money makes you good and no money makes you bad, it means that families, once you get into poverty, you can't get out of it. Because not only is it hard, not only is whether people like it or not, in the capitalist system, you can't work hard and be successful and make lots of money. It doesn't work that way. I grew up a farmer. I was a mover. I've worked very hard in my lifetime. And I don't know, whatever this money is that everyone's supposed to have, I never got any of it. I tell you that. And so, I forgot where I started. Oh my God. I hate when that happens. And so when you're in poverty, you stay there. And it is because hard work doesn't pull you out of poverty. And it is because of a mindset that's been forced onto kids who live in poverty their whole lives. And it's not forced on them by a parent who says, well, it's okay to be this way. It's not forced on them by some sort of mental health issue that tells them that they're not okay. It's forced on them by people who believe in capitalism so strongly that they use money as a meter for who somebody else is, or what basing the worth of a person on the amount of money they have. The worth of a person is they're a human being and they have worth. That's it. That's all there is to it. And to compare that, or to make them worth more or worth less because of a bunch of pieces of paper or numbers in a bank account, numbers in a computer somewhere, like that's foolish. And it's what's really funny is that the same people that talk about capitalism being our only way to freedom are the same people who yell loudest about things like, well, someday we're going to have tattoos on us that we're just going to be a number. What do you think you've created? Where do you think you've led us? To the fact that who a person is, or how much of a human they are, is a number in their bank account that you can't even see. At least if it was a tattoo, there's a number you can point to, and a number you can see, and a number that you can say that's who that person is. But you base it on a number you don't even know. I suppose that's enough rambling on that topic. So, I don't know. We'll see when I feel like putting another video up. They seem to come late at night. Sorry about that. I'll try to figure out a time that's a little more convenient for everyone, maybe even including me, because it's easier to control the lighting in this place during the day than it is at night sometimes. So, but yeah.